The wind had stilled by morning, but the snow hadn't. It lay in soft, weightless mounds across the pasture, covering everything in a thin, white hush. The kind of silence that came after grief or after too many years spent alone. Calder Boone stood on the porch with his hat brim pulled low and a wool coat clutched tight against his ribs. His eyes moved slow across the land, trained like a man used to seeing what others missed. The broken latch on a gate, a coyote's trail near the henhouse. But what caught his gaze this time wasn't a fox or a fence line. It was the edge of his lower field, near the old wagon half sunken in weeds. Something lay beneath it. He moved toward it cautiously, boots crunching over ice-crusted snow, hand resting against the butt of the rifle slung across his back. The closer he came, the more the shape revealed itself. A body, curled in a half-fetal sprawl beneath the wooden undercarriage of the wagon. Pale arms, tangled dark hair, a threadbare skirt soaked in red that had frozen in places. Her lips were cracked, her shoulders twitched, not from waking but from the cold pressing closer to the bone. When Calder knelt beside her, he saw the bullet wound just beneath her collarbone, crusted over but not clean. Not deep enough to kill, but close. Too close.
Yeah.
He looked around, as if expecting someone else, another body, another wagon. There was nothing, just the sound of wind against dead brush and the whistle of a hawk overhead. He exhaled slowly, then reached down. She stirred, when he lifted her, but didn't resist. Her limbs were limp, her breath shallow. Her skin was fever-warm under the cold. She was light, too light, and her face dusky, soft-boned, showed the features of Apache blood. Though her clothes were settler-stitched and worn at the sleeves, he didn't ask questions. He didn't speak. He just carried her back to the cabin. Inside, the fire was nearly out. Calder dropped another log onto the embers and stirred them to life with a poker, flames flaring like breath catching in the chest. He laid her gently on a bedroll near the stove and took off his coat, then his gloves. Her eyes fluttered once, barely, as if she sensed the heat but not the room. He found his thread and needle from the chest under the stairs. The whiskey bottle came next. He worked quietly, methodically. She groaned when he poured the liquor into the wound, but her hand only twitched. Her breath caught when the needle passed through flesh. She didn't scream, didn't cry, just let the pain take its shape and pass. He wrapped her shoulder in linen torn from an old undershirt. She was still shivering when he tucked a folded quilt around her. He stepped back and looked at her. He hadn't seen a woman in that bedroll since Mary died. And Mary had been full of fire and songs and a laugh that could cut through any silence. This girl, this stranger, she looked like silence given form. But it wasn't the peaceful kind. Stew was still warm from the night before, poured some into a tin bowl, and waited until her eyes opened again. It was past noon when she stirred for real, eyes opening in 2 flashes of wild amber. She looked around like someone unsure what century she'd landed in. Then she flinched at the pop of the firewood and reached for a knife that wasn't there. "You're safe," Calder said. She didn't answer. He offered the bowl of stew. She took it without thanks, but her hands trembled too badly to hold it. He placed it in her lap instead. The way her fingers curled around it told him more than words could name. He asked softly. "Elena. No last name. No hesitation either." "You shot?" he asked. "A beat," outrightly she said. He raised an eyebrow but said no more. They sat in silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the faint ticking of the wall clock. Elena sipped the stew in small movements, jaw tight like someone who hadn't eaten anything that wasn't stolen or fought for. She avoided his eyes. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a whisper. The sky had begun to bruise at the edges, sunset coming early under the weight of winter clouds. Calder moved to the old rocking chair. It creaked under him. Across the room, his wife's shawl still hung on the back of a second chair, untouched. The same place it had been for 2 winters now. He caught Elena's eyes drift toward it, then back down. "You can rest," he said after a while. "Ain't nobody coming out this far." She looked at him, not with gratitude, not with fear, just watched. like someone who'd been hunted too long to believe safety could be real. Then she let her head lean back and the bowl tip into her lap, already asleep before he could take it from her. Calder sat there for a long time, watching the firelight dance across her skin, then rise to catch the shawl and the window pane and the rifle leaning in the corner. The room had always been quiet, but now it felt ... different, like a breath he'd been holding for too many years, had finally been let out, slow, cold, and uncertain. But real. He didn't know who she was, didn't know what storm had driven her under his wagon. But he knew frostbite when he saw it, and wounds that went deeper than skin. So he poured himself a mug of coffee, sat down again, and stoked the fire till the room warmed enough for two. The days passed slow, like thawed molasses dripping down the walls of winter. Outside, the frost held its grip, turning the water troughs to glass and making the wood of the porch groan beneath Calder's boots each morning. He rose before the sun, as he always had, feeding the mare, cracking ice, checking the lines for breaks in the fencing where the snow leaned in too heavy. The rhythm of ranch life hadn't changed, but the shape of the silence inside the cabin had. Elena barely spoke. She slept long hours on the pallet near the stove and moved like her limbs still belonged to someone else. When she did stir, her fingers brushed the furniture with caution, like everything might vanish if touched too roughly. Calder wasn't used to a body in the cabin that wasn't his own. He found himself listening for her cough while he was outside, eyes shifting toward the window whenever the wind changed. Just to be sure, sometimes when he stepped in from the cold, she'd be sweeping the porch or ladling water from the iron kettle to pour into tin mugs for coffee. She didn't ask where anything belonged. She just moved around the cabin like a bird might know nest, but still drawn to warmth. He found a small bundle tucked behind the woodpile one afternoon, wrapped in an old cloth with frayed corners. When he opened it, beads spilled across his palm, red, white, and midnight blue, stained faintly with dried blood. He recognized the pattern of patchywork, delicate and patient. He wrapped them up again and put them back where he found them. Elena never mentioned it. She hadn't said another word. It's about her wound or who'd put a bullet in her. Calder didn't push. He'd learned long ago that questions could be another form of violence. Some things only came loose with time. It's like river ice breaking in spring. He couldn't stop thinking about Mary. She'd died to Winter's back, screaming. With pain his blood soaked the sheets, and the midwife wept and said, "I'm sorry," over and over like a prayer. Calder had buried her himself, in ground hard as stone. The wedding shawl, thick wool, and blue-stitched edges had hung on the cabin chair since, untouched, a relic. A scar. One evening, Calder came back late from the south fence, snow melting. Against his collar, breath raw from wind. The sky had bruised with cloud, and the scent of wood smoke curled into his coat before he even reached the porch. He opened the door to warmth. Elena stood near the fire, her back to him. The shawl, Mary's shawl, was wrapped around her shoulders. For a moment, he stopped breathing. She wasn't wearing it like a wife would, not like Mary used to, draped over both shoulders, edges clasped at the chest. Elena had wrapped it high, tight, like a shield, fringe hanging off her arms as she stared out through the frosted window. He didn't say a word. She turned slightly. Sensing him, and her eyes met his. She must have seen something shift in him, not anger, not grief, exactly, just an ache that had no name. She moved to remove the shawl. "No," he said finally. "It's warm." She paused, then turned back to the window. That night, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It just was. It's like breath in a barn. It's like snow falling where no one watched. The next morning, she was back in her worn coat, shawl, folded neatly over the back of the chair again. Calder ran his fingers along the fringe when she wasn't looking. It still smelled faintly of lavender and firewood. Later that day, he caught her out near the corral, standing with the mare. Elena wasn't riding her, just resting a palm against the animal's flank like they were old friends.
"How dare you?"
Calder remembered when Mary used to do the same, talk to the horses in low tones, her breath mingling with theirs. "I used to come through this way as a girl," Elena said, voice rough from disuse. Before everything got claimed and fenced? He didn't answer. Her braid was long and thick, looped down her back and damp from snow. A hawk circled overhead. My mother died near here, she added. Winter took her, not a bullet. He looked at her. She wasn't offering a story, just facts, bits of bone, not the whole body. I buried her with my own hands, she finished. He nodded once. That was enough. That night, as snow began to fall again, he left a mug of coffee by her bedroll without a word. She drank it hours later, after he'd gone to bed. He could hear the clink of the tin against her teeth and the soft exhale after. The first sip. In the dark, he lay with his eyes open, listening to the wind push against the cabin walls. The ghosts were louder now. Mary's laughter, the crying of the child that never drew breath, the way she used to hum while gutting fish. Calder knew grief had no end. It just changed its shape, the way firelight shifts on a wall. But somehow, the cabin no longer felt quite so hollow, not yet full, but not hollow either. Elena spoke little, moved soft, but she swept away more dust than she left behind, and Calder, for the first time in a long time, found himself reaching for warmth, not because the cold hurt, but because he remembered what warmth could feel like when it wasn't just a fire. The sky folded in low and heavy that afternoon, gray bruises swelling over the hills until the horizon disappeared altogether. Calder knew that weight. The storm would settle in fast and long, like that didn't just blow through it. Stayed, pressed its hands over the land and held everything still. By dusk, wind rattled the porch shingles. By nightfall, the world beyond the cabin had vanished in white. Inside, the fire crackled, steady and warm. Calder had closed the shutters and stacked extra logs beside the stove. The kettle hissed, and stew simmered in the iron pot, thick with potatoes and the last of the salted venison. Elena sat wrapped in a blanket, knees drawn to her chest, eyes fixed on the fire like it might vanish if she blinked. She hadn't spoken. Since that brief mention of her mother days ago, Calder didn't expect her to. But the storm had a way of stirring things loose. Wind howled through the gaps in the eaves. The kettle gave a soft whistle and Calder poured water into 2 mugs. He set one beside her, then sat in the chair across the room, the firelight throwing soft shadows along the walls. She took the mug but didn't drink. Instead, her fingers circled the rim, slow and uncertain. They thought I was someone else. She said quietly. He looked up, but didn't speak. Men with rifles. Drunk. One of them said I looked like his cousin's killer. The other said, no, she's just Indian. It's reason enough. Her voice didn't waver. It was too tired, too. I ran. They shot anyway. Calder's fingers tightened slightly on the cup in his lap. He knew the kind of men who wore hate like a second coat, loud in saloons, cruel in the dark. He'd seen their work before. I hid under that wagon because I couldn't crawl any farther, she said, still not looking at him. Didn't think I'd wake up. He stirred the stew slowly. Silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was a space she could breathe in. I ain't got a name worth remembering, she added after a while. Not in town. Not anywhere. He stood then, moved to the cupboard, and pulled out an old wool blanket. Not just any, but the one Mary used to keep on the end of the bed, stitched in faded blues and creams. He hesitated only briefly before walking it over and laying it beside Elena. Her eyes flicked to it. Yours? He nodded. Your wife's? He didn't answer. She looked at him for a long moment, then gently pulled the blanket over her shoulders. She said nothing, but her hands pressed to the fabric like she was afraid it might vanish if she didn't hold tight. That night, the wind screamed like something wild. The shutters groaned. The fire shrank low. Calder lay in bed, eyes open, staring. At the ceiling, as shadows danced across the wood, a sound made him sit up. A soft whimper. Not loud, not panicked, just raw, wounded. He walked into the front room. Elena lay curled near the stove, the blanket tangled around her legs, her shoulder pressed against the warm stones of the hearth. Her brow was damp, her lips parted, breath shallow. One hand clutched at her bandaged shoulder. He didn't wake her, didn't speak, just added a log to the fire and sat down in the rocking chair near her. The flames brightened again, stretching light across the floorboards. She stilled. Maybe she sensed him. Or maybe the warmth dulled the memory playing behind her eyes. He sat there a long time. Long enough for the fire to need tending again. By morning, the world outside was buried. Snow rose halfway up the windows. The storm had settled in, thick and merciless. But inside, the cabin glowed. Elena woke slowly. She saw him sitting nearby. She didn't flinch, just watched him for a moment and then shifted under the blanket. The way animals do when they realize they aren't alone but decide not to run. Later, that afternoon, they ate stew by the fire. Neither said much, but when she offered him the last spoonful from her bowl, he took it without comment, and that somehow said more than any story either of them had ever told. That night she didn't sleep on the floor. She took the pallet beside the stove again, but didn't wrap herself tight as before. The blanket was folded neatly by her side. Her braid was undone, black strands resting across her collar like lines inked onto parchment. Calder, lying in the dark behind the bedroom curtain, listened to the fire crackle and her breath even out. The cabin didn't feel like a tomb. Anymore it felt like a place still capable of holding life. Even broken things, it seemed, could keep each other warm. By the third week, the snow began to recede, shrinking into the shadows and crevices of the hills, like something ashamed to be seen in sunlight. Drips fell from the eaves in slow rhythm, and the earth showed its skin again, soaked, dark, and raw beneath the thaw, inside the cabin. The silence changed shape again. Elena moved like she belonged, but less softly now. Her steps were firmer, her eyes less clouded. Calder noticed how she checked the windows more often, how she kept her coat folded close and her satchel within reach. She no longer slept as deeply. Something in her was bracing for movement, or for something to break. That morning Calder was moving the firewood box when his boot kicked against something hard beneath her bedroll. A dull thud, metal against floorboards. He knelt and lifted the edge of the blanket. Wrapped in worn canvas was a rifle. Long, cold, too new to be his and too heavy for hunting birds. He unwrapped it slowly. The barrel was clean. The wood polished. Military issue. She stepped into the room just as he stood. Their eyes locked. He didn't speak at first, just held it out slightly. "I found it," she said after a pause. "In a saddlebag near the river bend. Didn't belong to no one breathing. You sure of that?" Her face tightened. "You think I'd carry something I used to shoot a man and keep it under my bed?" "I don't know what you'd do." "Neither do I," she said, then quieter. "Not lately." He set the rifle on the table. "Why keep it?" "'Cause there's men who don't ask before they raise their hands." Calder didn't reply. He wrapped the rifle again, but didn't return it. Just left it there on the table, beside the lamp. Later, when he saddled up to go into town, Elena didn't ask where he was headed. She stood at the edge of the porch with arms crossed, watching the road like she expected it to rise up and swallow them both whole. The town had shifted in his absence. At the general store, the clerk barely looked him in the eye. At the blacksmith's, a younger ranch hand, Ethan Lark, thin-eyed and too eager to talk, muttered something low while checking a stirrup strap. "You got company out there, Boone?" Calder said nothing. Ethan leaned in slightly. "Heard. There's a girl, Haffendine, wounded. Some say she shot a trader over in Chalia Creek. Marshal passed through 2 days ago, asked questions. Calder paid for his supplies and left without a word. On the ride home, wind cut sharp across the plain, but it wasn't the cold that kept his jaw tight. That night, Elena was outside feeding the chickens when he returned. The sky glowed faint with the first stars, and the cabin's window pulsed with lamplight like a heartbeat. They sat at the table without. Touching the stew, she looked at him across the room. "You went to town?" He nodded. "You hear anything?" "Marshals." "Sniffing around?" "Nothing more." She was quiet a long time. Then she said, "I'll go." His brow tightened. "Where does it matter?" "You won't last the mile." She stiffened at his tone. Better I die out there than bring trouble through your door. His voice was low but hard. You brought it already. She stood slowly, her jaw working like she might spit or cry, but she did neither. She grabbed her satchel and moved toward the door. He watched her walk out into the dark. It took him a full hour before he followed. The barn was cold, but lit by a single lantern she'd hung on a nail near the stall. The mare stood calm, steam rising from her nostrils. Elena wasn't packing. She was brushing the horse's flank with one of Mary's old curry combs. Her hands shook with each stroke. "I ain't running," she said without turning. "Just needed space to breathe." "You got it." She looked at him then. Firelight flickered across her face, casting shadows beneath her eyes. "I didn't shoot no one that didn't shoot first," she said. "And I didn't steal that. Rifle just took it off a dead man who'd have done worse to me if I'd let him." He believed her. Not because she said it, but because of the way she stood. Like someone too tired to lie. He nodded. Just once. Her breath caught slightly. "I don't know how to stay." "Not when staying gets folks hurt." "I've been hurt before," he said. "Still here." "Lost your wife?" "Yes." "Dad. You still let me in? I didn't know how not to." She looked away. The lantern hissed softly. The horse shifted its weight. Calder stepped forward and picked up the brush. She let him take it, let him finish brushing the mare's side in silence. Outside, the wind picked up again, stirring dust and melted snow in soft curls against the barn doors. They didn't speak again that night, but something changed. Not fixed, not forgiven, just understood. The air changed with the season's turn. The earth grew soft beneath their boots. And the morning sun carried enough strength to lift the frost off fence posts by mid-morning. Birds returned. The soil breathed again. Calder and Elena worked without. Needing to fill the hours with talk, she raked the barn clean and patched broken boards with a sure hand. He watched her fold each tool back into its place afterward, careful and deliberate. A woman raised around weather and hard days. He showed her the western slope, where wild grass grew thick and cattle wandered far. The fence had come down in the storm, warped and splintered. Together they drove in new posts, the hammer of steel on pine echoing across the hills. Elena's shoulder twinged when she lifted wire, but she never asked him to take over. Just gritted her teeth and kept on. Later, in the kitchen, she unwrapped a small bundle of dried leaves and roots, pressing one between her fingers to release the scent. "Black willow," she said. "Helps with fever and pain." Calder leaned. "In that what you used?" She nodded once. He handed her a clean tin. "Keep it here, in case I get shot next time." She smiled, brief and quiet. It softened the room more than the fire did. That week, a neighbor rode up in a rush, wide-eyed. "And breathless calves stuck down at the creek," he said. "Ice broke loose. I can't get her out alone." Calder saddled his horse without a word. Elena pulled on her coat before he could stop her. "You should rest that arm," he warned. "Creek don't care about my arm," she replied. "Just whether the calf drowns." They rode out fast, hooves flinging cold mud. The creek swelled with melted snow, biting and wild. The calf had fallen in near the bend, its tiny legs thrashing against the current. Calder waded in first, boots. Sinking deep into icy sludge, Elena followed without hesitation. Water soaking her skirts, the hem catching on reeds. She reached the calf first, wrapping her arms around its slick body as it cried out. Calder grabbed its front legs. Together, they pulled. The creek fought back, a force old as the land itself. Elena slipped once, hard, falling against a submerged stone. She gasped, clutching her shoulder. Calder nearly shouted, but she shook. Her head. "Keep pulling. They got the calf out." Mud-covered and shivering. It staggered up the bank. Only then did he see the blood soaking through Elena's coat again. She didn't cry out. Not yet. On the ride back, she swayed slightly in. The saddle. He reached over, steadying her with one hand, jaw tight. At the cabin, she tried to wave him off, but her knees buckled at the threshold. He caught her. Inside, The fire was already going. Sat her down near the stove and unbuttoned the coat gently. The wound had opened along the edge, old stitches torn loose. She didn't flinch, but her eyes were wet. He didn't speak, just ripped clean strips from his own undershirt, soaked them in warm water, and pressed them against her skin. "I thought I'd stopped bleeding," she whispered. "Sometimes it just takes longer to show." She laughed once, broken, then the tears came, slow, quiet, like the kind only strong people cry, the kind that have waited too long. He wrapped the wound again, tighter this time. His hand lingered at her shoulder. Her fingers found his wrist. The touch wasn't a question or an invitation, just proof that neither was alone anymore. Afterward, she sat in her corner, cross-legged by the fire, combing out her long black hair with a carved wood brush she'd found in Mary's drawer. She didn't ask permission. She began to braid it. Not tight and practical like she used to, but soft, deliberate, gesture with memory behind it. The cabin glowed in amber light. The silence was full. Calder watched her from the chair, elbows resting on his knees. "You could stay," he said. It surprised them both, sound of it in the air. Honest, unadorned. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Her hands paused, briefly in her braid, then continued slow and steady, and in the quiet space between the flames. Her eyes found his, and that was enough. The frost had returned that morning, clinging in a thin silver veil to every fence, rail, and branch tip. Calder was tightening the wire near the eastern pasture when he heard the hooves. Not fast like trouble coming, but steady, purposeful. Lawman's gait. He straightened before the rider cleared the ridge. The coat, the stance, the steel at his hip, Calder knew before the badge caught the sun. Marshal Brandt. Thin face, slow jaw. A man who didn't like being told he was wrong. "Morning," Brandt said, drawing rein. Calder rested a gloved hand on the post. "Something I can help you with?"
Word in town
"Is you've got someone staying out here. Girl Apache-blooded, maybe half. She's wanted for questioning." The marshal leaned slightly in the saddle. "Name's Elena. She left a trader full of lead over in Chalia Creek. Took a rifle and a mule. Rider come through here last week," Calder said evenly.
didn't
Brandt looked past him, toward the cabin tucked among the cottonwoods. "Mind if I look around? Don't see how I could stop you," Calder said, stepping back. The marshal dismounted, boots crunching over frost-hardened grass, moved slow, confident, like a man used to people getting out of his way. Inside the cabin, Elena sat by the fire, a quilt stretched across her lap, hands moving in small measured stitches. She didn't look up. The marshal stepped in, eyes sweeping the room. "I heard you were a widower," he said. Tone casual, Calder didn't answer. Brandt's gaze landed on the wrapped rifle, leaning against the wall. He crossed the room and unwrapped it. Military issue. Clean. Familiar. He paused there, carved faintly into the wooden stock, nearly hidden beneath the oil and grain, was a name, Mary. He looked back at Calder. "This hers?" Calder nodded. "Once. She was the only one who could hit a pine cone at 70 paces. The marshal ran a thumb along the carving. "You let a woman keep a weapon like this? I let my wife be herself." Brandt looked toward Elena. She still hadn't. Looked up from her needlework. The quilt was nearly finished. Soft blues and deep earthen reds. Colors of land and sky. Something in the marshal's jaw tightened. Not anger. Something closer to fatigue. "I've got 3 reports," he said. "A trader swears she took his horse. 2 men said she raised a rifle. Men say a lot of things when there's no one around to answer back." The marshal studied him for a long beat. Then, without another word, he rewrapped the rifle, set it down gently, and stepped. Outside, Calder followed. The cold had sharpened since sunrise. Brandt mounted up again, adjusting the reins. "A man asked me once what law's really worth if it ain't the truth," he said. "I didn't have an answer then. Don't really have one now either." Turned the horse, but this time, I'll let it be. Calder watched him ride off without a word. The wind carried the hoofbeats away until there was nothing but the hush of the trees. Back inside, Lena set her sewing aside. "You didn't have to lie," she said. He shrugged. He didn't feel like lying. I thought you'd let him take me. He looked at her for a long moment. I let the world take too much already. She swallowed, the words settling somewhere deep in her chest. That evening, she stood at the corral brushing Mary's mare. Calder joined her in silence. Together, they saddled the horse. Elena swung up with ease, sitting tall in the dusk light. The mare didn't protest. Calder stood beside her, one hand on the reins, one on the saddle horn. Town'll stare, he said. I'm used to stares. I know. They rode out just after sunset, the light amber and soft along the ridge. Calder rode his bay. Lena rode the mare with Mary's old blanket folded under the saddle. The wind was mild, carrying the scent of thawing earth and pine. The world looked new again, or maybe just honest. They passed no one on the trail. But by the time they reached the edge of town, lamps were burning behind curtains. The sound of dogs, a distant fiddle, folks on porches, fell quiet as they approached. Calder didn't slow, neither did Elena. They rode side by side, coats brushing, shoulders steady. She kept her chin level, eyes forward. No one spoke. But eyes followed them. Stares cut across the street like axes. But Calder's face didn't flicker, and Elena's hand never left the saddle horn. They reached the general store. Calder dismounted, tied the reins. Lena stayed seated a moment longer, then swung down with quiet grace. Her boots hit the ground like punctuation. Together they stepped inside. The clerk blinked, cleared his throat. "Evenin', Boone." Miss Elena didn't answer. She just moved toward the bolts of fabric and tins of coffee with quiet authority. Calder smiled faintly, then asked for flour. No one said anything else. They didn't need to. Some truths weren't shouted. Some were shown, and in a town that had never seen her as worthy, Elena Boone stood tall beside a man who finally did.